My name's Chris Bennett. Thank you guys for joining us. Let's do some cool stuff and ask questions and get to know the in and outs of the AudioControl 5-channel amplifiers.
Yes, sir. So yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm Matthew Palumbo. I'm the national trainer for AudioControl. And like Chris mentioned, today we are going to talk 5-channel amps, the LC 5.1300 and the D-5.1300. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just keep in mind throughout this, with Zoom and audio and all these different things, if you could use the chat feature to ask questions, that would be great. Chris will try to kind of keep an eye on the chat window and introduce those questions as they come about. So feel free to ask questions and we will try to get them answered for you. So with that, let's dive into the AudioControl 5-channel amplifiers. So these new 5-channel amps from AudioControl really represent a big deal for us. There's something we've been working on for a while. There's something that a lot of you have been, looking forward to for a while too. We've been talking about them for a little bit and are just super excited to get these out into the market and, really see some awesome systems come together using these amplifiers. And the first one to be released is the LC 5.1300. That one was released about a month ago, approximately, for those of you that haven't gotten your hands on one yet. About a month ago is when the LC5 started shipping, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of them out in the field. And so far, the response has been just awesome. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Oh, it's been ridiculous. Everybody that does audio and they work with AudioControl on a regular basis has installed these amplifiers, and they call us up and they're like, what's going on here? Like, how could it possibly be better? How? And the reality is that sometimes when you have products and you spend a whole lot of time and engineering on it, you have a unicorn. And I truly believe that we have a unicorn of an amplifier, in that beyond what Matthew's going to go over in the features and functions, the audio quality is amazing and special and set apart. So hopefully you guys will all see and understand as we talk about it, the depth and the realism of what we wanted to accomplish with a 5-channel amplifier. Historically, 5-channel amplifiers have always felt a little prone to some inadequacies, right? So you always had anemic bass response in a 5-channel amplifier. You always had where when the bass response does hit, the voltage rail sag on the input side, and the mid-range will distort. This amplifier is set apart in that we have not seen those characteristics. Though we do have a single power supply, there is enough power, juice, momentum, signal strength behind it that really set it apart and make it something special, where it remains linear, clean, loud, and special. So Matthew's going to go over the feature set, but trust us when we say that there's something special here that set it apart.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where you really have to experience it for yourself. If you have the opportunity to get your hands on one of these, get one into a customer's car, get one into your own car, pick one up, directly from us or from your distributor or what have you, at least get one of them and give it a shot, because I'm promising you're not going to regret it. There's been nothing but, positive feedback from the field on these. So before we dig into the specifics though, on the actual amplifiers themselves, I always like to cover, at least for a few seconds here, why an AudioControl amp? Why choose AudioControl? You have lots of choices out there when it comes to amplifiers, right? And even 5-channel amplifiers, even though there's not as many of them to choose from as, say, sub amps or 4 channels, there's still a lot of 5-channel amps out in the market. So why AudioControl? Why us? For 5-channel amps and any other product. So some of the things that I want you to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at amplifiers in general and who to partner with for these things is the input sections. We really do have an unequaled input section in our amplifiers. There is nothing else out there that does what these amps do in that input section. We're going to dig deeper into what I mean by that here in a little bit. The other side of that is the support before and after the sale. and before and after the install. Because with our products, not only do you have the support of, say, Chris and I, for trainings and things like that, but we have an incredible tech support team right here in Washington State. You're not calling overseas to a call center that has nothing to do with the product. You're not calling into some guy that's just reading an owner's manual. You've got some really good support behind you, as well as the things that guys don't always think about. We have a really active Facebook group for our dealers and reps where you can ask for some help and get an answer pretty quickly. We have a great enthusiast group online, that sort of thing. So there's some really cool support before and after. And even when it comes to things like software for DSP amplifiers, we are not that company that puts out a DSP product and then never touches the software again. We're still releasing updates for DSP products that have been out for a few years, and we still want to make those products as good as we possibly can. Even if you did buy it a couple of years ago, we still want to make that a better experience for you. And so we're continually developing new updates. The other thing is the warranty. We literally have the industry's best warranty across the board. I have yet to hear of any other company in the car audio realm with a 5-year warranty on their products. So not only does that give you peace of mind, but of course you can use that to your advantage when selling to your clients. In the back of your mind, you can take care of this customer or client. And so we want you to know that we're going to take care of you in that same way. So you can sell AudioControl products, be successful with them, and know that if anything does ever go down, if anything happens, if something goes wrong, we're going to be the guys to take care of you. We're not that company that's going to stick it to you when you're 2 days past warranty or whatever. Like, that's just not who we are. So we're always going to be around to take care of you. And on that same topic is, where do the products that you sell and install come from? Were they designed here? Were they engineered here? Does the company that even produces them or sells them, markets them, where are they based out of? We are a US company. We're based here in the greater Seattle area. And this is where we do all of our design and engineering. This is where we do, a lot of the building and a lot of the assembly and a lot of the testing and all that stuff. A lot of that stuff happens here. We try to keep as much of it local as we possibly can. So it's nice to know that sometimes in your backyard is a company that's actually standing behind this stuff and producing these awesome products. When it comes to the 5-channel amplifiers in particular, the other thing to think about is ease of install. How much time are you going to have to spend to put this product in and make this car sound good? And most importantly, go ring up the sale and get this car down the road, right? I mean, we're all in this business because we love it, but we're also in this business to take home a check and have some way to pay our bills. So we do need to get these cars out of the bay and down the road, and ease of install is a big part of that. And it comes down to little things sometimes. When you look at the design of a product, pay attention to little things like the industrial design and how they were produced. There's a reason that all of the connections are on one side of these amplifiers. Yes, it looks nice, but it's also a whole lot easier to put into a car when you don't have wires coming out of both ends. Things like the protection circuitry, which we'll talk more about in a little bit too, but the protection circuitry in these is pretty genius. And it's something that at a quick glance, you can tell, if there is a problem, what's going on with it and why. So just, kind of look at those types of things when you look at the design and the features of an amplifier. Power is, of course, important. Features are important. All those things are important, but I think it really goes beyond that. And I think that's some of the times where the special sauce that we sprinkle on from AudioControl really kind of shines through. And one of my favorite parts is just more power, right? I mean, we all want more powerful amplifiers. And how often do we see a 1300 watt RMS 5-channel amplifier? Not often, especially not one that's actually clean and sounds good and does what the company says it does. In fact, with all of our amplifiers, you'll actually notice that most of them are underrated if you ever look up some of the videos online and things like that and have a look at some of the testing.
Yeah, we work our tails off to make sure that all of you guys are getting more power. I mean, at the end of the day, all of the retailers are out there trying to do something special for their consumer. And that's to make louder, cleaner, dynamic systems that sound great. And, with DSP, we get really focused on a whole bunch of other stuff. But at the end of the day, AudioControl is set out a precedence to have the most power in comparable amplifiers, technology, and features. So we're just really trying to make sure that at the end of the day, whatever happens on the input side, whatever happens on the output side, in between, you have a great experience and have more power output. And when you look at price comparisons in other brands and how we react to the marketplace, generally we're 20 to 30% more power output.
Yeah, that's
That's,
a really good point too. I mean,
yeah.
20 to 30% is not a little bit, right? I mean, that's a substantial amount of power that you're getting above and beyond what you paid for. So if we have time too, I'll circle back and we'll play this video and we can have a look at some of these specs. But if you guys get a chance, if we don't run in, have enough time today, go check out this video on YouTube and you can see some of the actual specs of this amplifier. It's a fairly long video, so we won't play the whole thing, but go on YouTube, look up LC 5.1300 and check out some of these reviews out there. I think you'll be absolutely blown away by how much power we're actually getting out of this amplifier, not only on that 5th sub channel, which is important, but on those 4 main channels as well. There's a lot going on in there, that's for sure. So let's get into the actual amplifiers themselves and get a little bit into these specific models. So the first one we're going to talk about today is the LC 5.1300. I mentioned a little bit earlier that this model is currently shipping. It started shipping about a month ago. And, Chris and I have talked a little bit throughout this about some of the success that that's had so far. And not only with videos online and reviewers, but just hearing stuff from dealers and from even consumers via social media, the impressions and the feedback has just been through the roof. It's been pretty incredible, hasn't it, Chris?
The 5-channel is one of those. It's a unicorn. It's a car audio unicorn. Yeah. It is something that is set apart and special. Engineers, it's one of those things that baffle engineers, right? Sometimes you work your tail off and you can make something, and it's okay, right? It does what it needs to do. When we all come together, Matthew and Alex and myself, we all come together and we sit there and we go, hey, this is the spec that we want. And then, it fluctuates stuff, in management, it changes. And then all of a sudden this amplifier comes out and it's like, it blows all of our expectations away. I really think the 5 channels are the precedents and our future going forward way of looking at power, how it's different, set apart, and it's just an amazing thing. Not only do we focus on the features, the inputs, the power, the performance, and the warranty, but we focus on, at the end of the day, what the heck does it sound like?
Right. We're all in this for sound. It's supposed to be about sound.
All that other stuff is like amazing, and it's like all the pieces that come together. But at the end of the day, we all just want to sit back and go, all right, let's listen to this thing.
Right. Does it sound good? That's the big thing.
Does it sound good?
Yeah.
These and 5 channels sound amazing. I mean, it is blowing away our expectations. We make tens of thousands of dollars, home amplifiers, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we make home amplifiers that would blow most of the car audio guys away. And the audio passing through some of these 5-channel amplifiers is pretty special, even compared to home amplifiers from the AudioControl lineup that have exceeded, some of the most rigorous tests.
And discerning listeners too.
Oh yeah. It's pretty amazing.
I think the one that really stood out to me too was getting a phone call from Dean and Fernando late at night and them going, what is this thing? How does this sound this good? I think, Dean's pretty picky. I think getting that call, just that should speak volumes for anybody listening to this right now. I personally.
Yeah, we all listen to cars every day. Every single day. We're in cars, we're ingrained in this business of 12 volt. And, one of the things that I love about all audio control amplifiers is that I have 26 years of getting into a car and just sitting there and like turning up the volume, whether it's
Hmm.
installed and tuned or whatever, and just turning up the volume and knowing where in my mindset when I think about the speakers, the equipment, whatever's in there, where the threshold is where it starts to deteriorate, right? With all audio control amplifiers, it always exceeds my expectations. So um, with the 5 channels, it's even more so. Like as you're turning up the volume, right? We all know, like at some volume, it starts to go south on you, and
Right.
whether that's in high frequency deterioration or mid bass distortion, audio control amplifiers, and particularly the 5 channels, as you're voluming them up, it remains linear, strong, and clean. And a lot of times, the clarity of it will make you think, oh, it's not that loud. But then you turn
Hmm.
it off and you get out of the car and your ears are ringing, and you're experiencing that concert, experience when you're in a concert and you don't even realize how fatigued your ears really are because it is so clean and it
Yeah.
is linear and proper.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at these, we've talked a little bit about their sound and how good they sound and all that stuff. And we should dig into some of these features a little bit. So let's talk
Yeah.
features. Let's talk power. Looking at the 5.1300, obviously 5 channel amp, 1300 watts, that goes without saying. But how do we divide up that 1300 watts? I think the way most guys are going to end up running these is going to be 4 ohms on the 4 main channels and 2 ohms on the sub channel. I think is going to be the most common way. And in that scenario, you'll get 100 by 4 plus 500 by 1. That alone, that's 900 watts. That's a pretty robust system. This is actually capable, if you ran everything at 2 ohms, of 200 by 4 plus 500 by 1. It's a lot of power, you guys. It's also a lot of flexibility because when you have that type of power, there's a lot that you can do with that, obviously, right? So it doesn't have to just be components in the front and coaxes in the back and a sub. I mean, there's a lot you could do with this. We could do a 3-way component system with this. We could do one LC5 per side if you wanted to go that route, if you're using a DSP. There's a lot of opportunities with these amplifiers. So although, yes, most of these will drop into systems and power some coaxes and components in a sub, don't necessarily think of them as only being for that because they can be used in a lot of different scenarios. So we've talked about power. They make a ton of it. Keep in mind, like Chris and I mentioned a little bit earlier too, those ratings are pretty conservative. If we get around to watching that video from Williston Audio Labs, you'll see what I mean. But especially on that sub channel, there is a lot of power on tap here. The other thing that's really nice on these, and we haven't really touched on it yet, is that we really tried to just simplify the signal path. If you've experienced one of our LC 4.800 or 6.1200 4-channel or 6-channel multi-channel amplifiers, they offer a ton of flexibility, a ton of features, really great sound quality and power. But sometimes for some installers, they're almost overwhelming because they have so many crossover options and so many signal path options and things like that. And so with the LC5, we really tried to take that and simplify it a little bit so that the average tech can go grab one of these off the shelf, get it installed in a car relatively quickly, and make it sound great. And that's really what these are all about. I think simplifying the control panel and the signal path was important on these. Little things like if we plug in a ACR1 dash control knob, the bass control knob, it just controls channel 5 because 90% of the time, that's what we're going to want that bass knob to control is the subwoofer, right? So we made it so that when you plug in an ACR1, it just controls that sub. You don't have to flip any, extra stuff or tell it to control that sub. It just does it. Acubase is only on channel 5 as well. Again, because most of the time it's going to be used on channel 5. So we tried to go with the common case scenario. How is this thing actually going to be used? And that's really where we put most of our design work and signal path into this is how is it really going to be used? Along those same, tokens is, a lot of guys that are going to be installing this unfortunately, may not have an oscilloscope or an RTA and all those tools of the trade. They should, but not everybody does. And we're also going to see consumers putting these in who aren't probably going to have those tools. So we have things like a milk indicator, which is maximum input level control. We have maximized LEDs for all of the outputs. So there's some great simple tech that's built into this that makes it a home run, that makes it easier to install, that makes it faster to set up. Remember, the whole point with an LC5.1300 is to get it off the shelf, get it in the car, make this car sound great, blow the customer's expectations away, and then get on to the next. I mean, that's what it's really all about. I think this amplifier does that really well. The last thing that I didn't mention yet on this one that's built in and is really special, something that really makes this apart from all the rest, is built-in signal summing with 8 high-level inputs. So this amplifier has 6 channels of low level in. It has 8 channels of high level in. So if I was a young sales guy and I was new in this business and I wasn't really that sure of which cars, have a factory amp and which cars don't, and do I need a preamp and do I need an accessory, or how does this work? We all get trained usually as sales guys to go out to the car, look at what the car has, and then try to plan based off of that. And there's no worse feeling as a sales guy than getting a technician walking back up front with the product you sold and him telling you, hey, this isn't going to work, right? Nobody likes that. So if you were a young sales guy and you were starting out, I would just shoot for LC5s in every system if it were me, because there's really nothing they won't work with. That's the point I'm getting to in my long drawn out method is, no matter whether it's aftermarket radio, factory radio, premium sound, base model sound, it doesn't matter. An LC5 can handle it, make it sound great, deal with the signal, do the summing if you need to do summing, and away you go. And something that I'll let Chris talk a little bit about too that was kind of special with this one is the ability to maintain some of those factory features. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Chris?
Yeah. As a retailer, I always felt guilty. I'm an old school retailer, right? So we used to sell harnesses for between $12.95 and $19.95, and then all of a sudden, integration harnesses came out, right? GM RCO1 or whatever for chime retention, and all of a sudden it was like I was really timid about selling a $79 harness. When you look at the price of this amplifier, it's pretty stinking amazing to know what's built into it for you guys and the price points that are achievable. If you're doing an LC2i, an LC7i, an LC, 8i, whatever it is, there's a great price point built into this. But when you look at the power and how much power you're getting out of it and the clarity, we will never, ever, ever stop emphasizing the clarity of the power that we're going to deliver, right? And so this amplifier excels in all those regards. All of our amplifiers do, so the ability to have that summing and the OE integration stuff allows a salesperson, an installer, a tech, whatever it is, to make the most and deliver the most power at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I heard recently from a tech that I thought was a really cool way, a sales guy actually, not a tech, of selling a product like this, and some of you may want to adopt a similar strategy or at least try it sometime, is he said, when I sell an amplifier like this, here's what I do. He goes, I don't put it down on the paper as $7.99. He said, I put this down as $4.99 and then $2.99 for a integration device. That's how he breaks it down. So when he's writing up his quote, that's how he does it. And then at the end of the day, it's an $800 amplifier, but that $300 piece is built in. And when you break it down like that for a customer and you go, no, it's a $500 amp with a $300 integration device built in, if they want to think of it that way, it really, for a lot of consumers, they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Instead of thinking, well, it's this $800 amplifier. And really for what you're getting, $799 is super reasonable considering what's built inside this.
Plus the amount of inputs and outputs. So it does have complete control over all of those 8 inputs. So you can do a complete straight in, straight out amplify system for any late model vehicle that has 12, 15 channels built in, right? So you can select and go, you know what, I want to keep these isolated and separated. Or if you have a 3-year-old vehicle that comes in that just has, a 3-way front stage, well, you can take that and sum those 2 front stages, and still get tons of power going out to the replacement speakers and do some
Yeah.
really amazing stuff.
Yeah, and not only can you have all that power and do that summing and stuff like that, but one of the other things that Chris brought up last night in one of our trainings was the ability to not only do that but maintain factory fader and factory
Mm,
sub control in a lot of those vehicles. In a lot of those cars, they have a factory sub control on the radio these days. It's actually kind of a cool feature. We would never have 10 years ago, we would have never thought of a factory radio having a subwoofer control, but a lot of today's vehicles have that. And if your customer's vehicle comes in and has that type of feature, a lot of times they're going to want to keep it. And if you can keep it for them, why not? And with an amplifier like this, you can keep that factory sub signal coming in. You can keep those front signals separate from the rears, even though you're doing summing. And now you've maintained balance and fader. You've maintained their factory subwoofer control. And now that factory radio, all the features that come up on the screen still work, because for a lot of customers, that's important. To us car audio guys, we go, oh, who cares? We got a bass knob down here. We don't care about the factory sub
right.
control. Oh, fader? Who needs a fader? Who needs rear speakers at all, right? I mean, that's how us car audio guys think, but your customers don't think like you do. No matter how much you want to train them to not want rear speakers, a lot of them still want rear speakers. No matter how much you try to train them to not care about a fader, a lot of them are going to want that fader to work.
How many cars out there today? That's a great question, Matthew. Is like, how
Mhm.
many cars out there today have a subwoofer control built into them? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I would love to know that as a retailer, so
Yeah,
I could be like, you know what? Here, that's actually a selling point.
for sure.
With any product is like, well, I know you have to go in, and when you control your subwoofer, it's 3 menus back, right? So you have to go
Hmm.
in, you have to go to sound, you have to go to, tone or whatever
Yeah.
before you get to the subwoofer control. Um, I would ask that question as a salesperson and be like, you know what? We're going to make it really simple for you. We're going to do an AudioControl LC51300. We're going to be able to integrate and grab the high frequency, the mid frequency. And you know what else we're going to do? We're going to make sure that you have an ACR1 that's going to allow you to have a quick, simple control over your subwoofer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. And so, speaking of summing and all these things, I wanted to give you guys a close-up impression of what's the control panel on an LC5 looks like. Now, of course, they do have these awesome cover panels that come on them, just like all of our amplifiers do. Hold this back a little bit so you can see it. But yes, so they look gorgeous when they're all covered up. Your customer doesn't have to see all those controls, and it's easy to hide that stuff so that they don't see it, and just so that maybe prying fingers don't get in there, that sort of thing. So when you're looking at this top cover panel, there's a couple of things that you'll notice. The controls are all laid out logically. There's an easy kind of signal flow and a workflow throughout this. And that's how detailed we get into industrial design. I have had conversations with our engineers before about, well, Matt, when somebody goes through and sets this up, how do they set it up? Do they set gain first? Do they set crossover first? How do guys actually set these up? And that's really where this comes from. That's why these controls are laid out the way they're controlled, or laid out the way they are, I should say. So when you look at this, the very first thing on there is basically GTO. How are we going to turn this thing on? We got to get it to turn on, right? Are we going to GTO turn on, or are we going to use a remote turn on? A quick note for you, if you're not familiar with this from our other products, if you do use GTO to turn this on, GTO stands for great turn on, by the way. It's our DC offset based, 6-volt standard signal sensing turn on. If you do use that to turn on this product, the remote turn on input terminal does become an output. So if you are doing more than one amplifier and need to turn that other amp on somehow, this can be your output. And that's why you'll notice it says remote in/out. So in
Matthew,
case
do
you're
you know of
curious.
any other amplifier that does that? I mean, that's
Mm,
something that, like, a few years back we had built in and designed,
yeah.
and I
I've
still
seen it
to
a
this
couple of
day I don't
times,
know if
but I don't
that's
recall.
okay.
Yeah, I think I have seen it in another company's amplifier, but it's been a few years since I've seen it. I know it was kind of a niche specialty thing. I think I'd only seen it in maybe one or two other models. Maybe somebody in this group can correct us on that in the chat if they work with a certain brand who does.
Yeah.
But I think that's a pretty, even if others do have it, it's a very cool feature. And it's one of those things that you don't think about until you need it, until you need that
Exactly.
turn on to turn on that other amplifier. And you're like, oh, this has it. That's great.
It
It's
is one
just
of
one of those
those
time
things,
saving.
like, as we, as I am more detached from being, I don't install in every car every day, but that's something that I look at that just go, wow, that would have solved a whole lot of problems back in the day,
Oh man.
and
Yeah.
daisy chaining a turn on and remote turn on, just wiring in a relay. If you're just doing it, an LC 1300 or an LC 4800 with a bass amp, and you need to trigger the next downstream amplifier, that is amazing.
Yeah. Or even triggering, I don't know, whatever, an epicenter to a bigger sub amp, or whatever else you might have downstream. That remote turn on becomes very, very useful. Or even use that remote turn on to trigger a relay and turn on some LEDs in a cool custom box or something. I don't know. There's lots of cool uses for that remote turn on out. So yeah, as you're going through the signal path on here, I'm not going to walk you through every single setting on there. I think most of you can find your way through that. But one of the things to pay attention to on this is when you look at the crossover section, look at the fact that there is more than one setting on those channel 1 and 2 high pass. It is a high pass filter only, okay? You're not going to low pass the front channels. And again, that goes back to simplifying this amplifier. We saw no reason to put low pass filters on those front 2 channels because, again, 99% of the time, that is not how this amp's going to be used. So instead, what we did is we did high pass, but we gave you a dual range high pass. So if you are just doing, passive components or coaxials or something like that, you've got the crossovers to do it. But if you happen to be doing a little bit more elaborate system and going, with an active setup, you can use this to do, a high, tweeters on channel 1, 2, mid bass on channel 3, 4, and sub on channel 5. So you can do like a 3-way active setup with this and have an awesome sounding system and toss those passive crossovers in the bin. So there's some really cool setup there. The other thing I always want to bring up with these amps before we move on to anything else is the ability to feed in just 2 channels of audio and have it populate all 5 channels of output. As I've progressed through my career, I'll tell you one thing that I hate more than anything else. I hate Y adapters, okay? Hate them. I hate Y adapters. I hate Y adapters and I hate jumpers. I don't like jumping signal from input to input. It seems so silly to me when, once you get used to having awesome products like this where you just flip a switch and then you have to deal with something with Y adapters or jumpers, you're like, God, why didn't they just put a switch on here? So that's one thing that I always like guys to pay attention to on this too is, again, it doesn't matter until you need it. Until that car you get into and there's only 2 channels of usable audio in that car, just remember, you can feed in those 2 channels of usable audio into this one and have it populate all 5 outputs and have an awesome sounding system. Now, yes, in that scenario, that customer would lose their fader if they're worried about that. But hey, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And that's that little switch there that says sum and separate with the bus sum. You'll see those couple of switches there. That's exactly what that is. It's basically a cascading input, so you can link inputs down the line. The other thing that I want you to notice is that front high level. There's a dial all the way to the far left almost that says front high level, and it's a turning dial, not a switch. That dial is for basically bringing in how much of that extra pair of inputs do we want brought into the signal path, because you have essentially a front pair of inputs, high level, a front or a rear pair of inputs, high level, and a sub pair of inputs, high level. That extra set of inputs, the reason we have 8, is called front high level inputs. And this really comes into play probably the majority of the time in cars that have discretely amplified factory crossed over channels. Think of like a BMW where everything is in the factory amplifier. Crossovers are built in there, amplification is built in there. You can't get a full range output out of that car, right? You're going to have signals that go to the tweeter and the A pillar are going to be high frequency only. And in that car, there's no way to get anything else out of those leads, right? So what you could do is grab the signals from those front tweeters, bring those into front high level, grab the signal from the front door mid woofers and bring that into the front inputs. And now you can use that front high level dial to mix those signals together and achieve full range sound. So now when you do put in a pair of aftermarket, say, components, and you are going to run them passive with the included passive crossover, now you can run full range into those components and get that awesome sound you're hoping for. The other thing to keep in mind with that front high level input is what else can we do with it? Well, maybe you're working on a car that has full range fronts, full range rears. Okay, fine. But it also has a center channel. And maybe that factory center channel is where all their phone call audio comes from, or their navigation prompts, or their turn signal clicks, or whatever it is. And maybe they want to keep that stuff. You know, not everybody hates door chimes and that thing. Some people want to keep that stuff, and that's fine. Bring in those channels that have the chime information, or bring in those channels that are the factory center or navigation prompts or phone audio, whatever it is. Bring those into that front high level and use that mixer to mix that into the signal path. Now their phone call audio can come out of everything. You don't have to put a little external speaker in the car or leave that factory center channel present. It just gives you a lot more options. There's a lot more you can do with it. I saw a question in the chat asking if this has a pair of RCA outputs. It does not. However, stay tuned, and when we start talking about another product here in a minute, we will cover that. So thank you for asking that question. So that's the majority of the layout and the signal setup in this one. Like I said, if you haven't paid attention to it yet, look at those crossover sections and really pay attention to how simple we made this for you. Channel 5.6 is just a sub out. It only has a low pass on there, right? There's no need to high pass that one, so we didn't put that option in there. On channel 3 and 4, you have a little bit more flexibility because you might want to run it to a pair of rear coaxials. You may be running it to some front mid-bass drivers ran active or something like that. So we did give you the ability to do band pass on channel 3 and 4. So this can be used in a nice 2.1 setup, or a 4.1 setup, or an active three-way, or whatever you want to use it for. There's some really cool options there.
There's so many more exotics and nice cars out there that have the ability for you guys to be using some bigger mid-bass drivers. And this amplifier, if you just really want to keep it simple, I know it sounds ridiculous, but there is a world of guys out there who have some exotic cars who really only want to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on their car, and want to have the best speaker. And a lot of times they don't want to spend a whole lot of money on DSP or amplification. And I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but we see that a lot on the home side too. It's like, oh, I have to have the best tower speakers here, and then they want to, like shy away when it comes to amplification. The best home speakers out there are not going to sound very good with a subpar amplifier. We see that all the time on the home side. And I think in the car side, we don't see it as much, but I think we need to be preaching that as like, hey, it doesn't matter how good that speaker is. There's things that go behind it. Number one, amplification. Number two, DSP. Like if we don't have full control over the power or the control of the speaker, what good is that speaker?
Right.
I think these amplifiers have this combination of power that exceeds expectations. With complete and total control, you can make some subpar speakers maybe sound absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think with a lot of those too, like I would shift more of my budget to putting in a higher quality amplifier before I blew my whole budget on speakers. Because
Yeah.
like you mentioned, I mean, $1,000 set of speakers ran off a $200 amplifier. I'd rather have a $600 set of speakers ran off of a $800 amplifier. You know what I mean? I think it's going to just be a much better sounding. I know it's going to be a much better sounding system. And on the topic of like exotics and some of these newer cars where they can fit a 8-inch mid bass in those front doors, sometimes hell, some of them can fit a 10 in those front doors.
Yep.
Some of those Mazdas for a while had a 10, or the Corvettes and those things. Keep that in mind when you're looking at these amplifiers too. As much as, again, as car audio guys, we all want to say, well, of course you need two 10s, of course you need a single 12, of course you need this and that. Not every customer is going to go for that. You are going to get those guys who are like, look, I don't care how small you say you can put a sub in my car, I don't want one. There are those guys that just don't and won't go for it. Okay, fine, shift to plan B. Plan B is we put some 10s in the front doors and we run them off the 5th channel of this bad boy and you're set. That could still be a really nice sounding system. Is it going to have crazy low bass extension? No, but it could sound really good.
BMW under seats.
I was going to say BMWs too. Yep. Yeah, those 7 or 8s that are under those front seats. Yeah, this would be a great system builder for those guys too. It's like they want something to up the game and make it sound better, but they don't want it to look any different. They don't want to go crazy. They don't want to add an enclosure where they're not ready for it yet. You could start with something like this and amplify the 4 doors and the under seat subs and really step up that vehicle without really adding a lot of product to that car. We've even done some systems at AudioControl for employees and stuff where we've amplified factory speakers, taken factory speakers and just applied power and sometimes processing. But even, if it's a late enough model car where we know the speakers are in okay shape, a lot of times it's just power that they're lacking, so it's definitely something to consider. It really, we just want you guys to focus on and keep in mind that these don't have to be front rear sub. There is so many more potential systems that could go along with these. So we've talked a lot about the LC 5.1300. Let's talk a little bit about the D 5.1300. So the D5 is the one that some of you are waiting for. I see in the chat, some guys are waiting to get their hands on one because they're waiting for the D. So the D 5.1300 is the same chassis and same power of the LC. They are both 1300 watts. They are both physically the same chassis size. I've got a D5 sitting right here. I don't know how well I can hold them both up, but they are both the same exact chassis size, guys. As far as that question in the chat, what size power these will take in, these will accept a 1/0 input. So you can fit a 1 gauge in these guys. And they are fused to handle it too. These have, 4 40 amp fuses, it looks like, or 430s on these ones. 430s. Yep, 430 amp fuses in these. So they are, they've got it there. So with these ones too, yes, 1/0 inputs, and the 1/0 inputs are, as you may see on your screen, now a hex head as well. We did take your guys' advice. We listened to feedback. We are one of those companies where when you guys say, hey, we don't like this, will you change it? A lot of times we'll actually change it. Imagine that. So we took your guys' advice and we have swapped these to those Allen head style, so you can really torque down that 1 gauge in there. And then, the main speaker outputs on both of these amps, the LC and the D5, are our Phoenix connector 4-pin connector. It handles some decently substantial size wire, especially when using ferrules. I would recommend using ferrules on those guys, and you could fit, a nice 14 gauge or so in there. But you'll notice on the sub output, it's a standard screw type output. So to handle that additional power that these make, we knew we couldn't just use a Phoenix connector on those ones. So those are a standard style screw down terminal, which just kind of speaks a little bit to the type of power that these guys are doing. If it can't be handled by a Phoenix connector, it's got to be pretty substantial. So, so when looking at the D5.1300, let's dive into some of the details here. Take a look at that top panel, and the first thing you'll probably notice is the absence of pretty much everything, right? The only physical control period that comes up on this amplifier is GTO. And GTO, again, stands for great turn on. That is our auto turn on feature, DC offset turn on, 6-volt turn on, whatever you want to call it. That's what that feature is. It's looking at the front left high level input, and that's what it's looking at to trip GTO, if you want to think of it that way. The other things that are on top of the D5 are all LEDs. They're all status LEDs or protection LEDs and things like that. So going from left to right there, you've got power, protection, and communication LEDs. So power, of course, is just going to light up when it powers on. Our protection LED can actually flash different patterns in coordination with the blue lights that come out of the top. So when these amps are powered on, there is some great blue backlighting that comes out of the top panel, out of the fins, I should say, out of the heatsink. This blue heatsink lights will do a combination spottiness, basically, with the protection LED flashing, and that's how we tell what the protection status is. And so you're not sitting there trying to figure out, well, great, it's in protection, but why? It's going to actually tell you under voltage, over voltage, undercurrent, overcurrent, thermal protection, short protection, that sort of thing. It can tell you that just with a sequence of flashes and combination of blue lighting. So going down the line there, you've got your GTO, which we talked about. Milk is source clip. This is your clipping indicator for the input side. And that's going to be a physical LED on the product itself. And then we have our maximized inputs and maximized outputs. Again, for you guys that maybe don't have an oscilloscope or don't have the tools to really maximize those things and find out where your source unit clips and where things should be set, these indicators are a great tool to help with that. Now, are little LEDs on an amplifier going to be as accurate as having an oscilloscope? Absolutely not. They are meant to be they're meant to be a guide. Think of them like a dummy light in your car's gauge cluster, right? Check engine light doesn't mean, hey, you should absolutely pull over right this second, your car's about to blow up. But it is an indicator that you may want to have a look at something. Think of these indicators as the same way. We do get some calls from guys sometimes that are so hung up that they're not seeing a maximized light come on. So they don't think they're getting the max out of the amplifier. That's not always the case. And same thing with the milk light. Just because the milk light doesn't light up, maybe your source unit truly isn't clipping. That is a possibility. Not every source unit is going to distort and clip. So just keep in mind, these are meant to be guides, they're indicators, they're dummy lights, however you want to think of them. They are not a set in stone thing that you have to follow. They're just meant there to be a guide and assist you. So when looking at the D51300, again, specs wise, this is the same power as our LC. So this is still going to be 100 by 4 plus 300 by 1 at 4 ohms, or 200 by 4 plus 500 by 1 at 2 ohms. So you can still get a ton of power out of this thing. This may go without saying, but of course you can run 2 channels at 2 ohm and 2 channels at 4 ohm. It doesn't make any difference. You can combine and mix and match those channels however you like. So you could even bridge those channels as well. This is bridgeable on the multi-channel portion. Maybe that goes without saying, but it is bridgeable. You will get 400 watts in bridged mode. So you could have 400 by 2 plus 500 by 1, or 400 by 2 plus 300 by 1, depending on what impedance you run this thing at. With the DM Smart DSP app and the DSP that's built into this amplifier, that adds some really cool features for you. Of course, most of you know what a DSP does, what it is, and how it works. But the things I want to point out to just kind of go over this bird's eye view is that basically by having a DSP rather than physical controls, we can apply high pass, low pass, band pass filters to any channel we want. There is no rule when it comes to being DSP controlled compared to physical dials and controls. So if you want to high pass channel 5, you can. If you want Acubase on channels 1 and 2, you can do that. That's the type of stuff that we can do when we're doing DSP instead of physical controls. You could do anything you want. You want to Acubase every channel in this amplifier? go for it. You can run this thing in any configuration imaginable at that point. The other couple of things that are that come along the territory with the D class of amplifiers are, yes, we still have the 8 high-level inputs. We still have signal summing built in, but we have the ability to sum pretty much any channels we want. So instead of just being able to sum, front and front high level, we can sum all of the channels if we want to. If you need to sum front high 1 and 2 plus 3 and 4 and combine them all together, you can do that. You can do all the summing that you could pretty much possibly want all within this amplifier. But the things that really separate this, besides having DSP built in, the physical things that I think are really special and make it pop are those RCA outputs. I think it was Tony earlier that brought that up and asked the question about it. I am a big fan of having RCA outs on an amplifier. Now, the thing that I want to clarify on that, you guys, is that these are not an RCA pass-through. Do not confuse these when you see another amplifier on the market that has a pass-through. These are not a pass-through. These are a DSP-able RCA output. They're a DSP out. They're just not amplified. They're low-level DSP output. So when we're talking about system building and expansion and planning for the future and all of those things, that's where this comes into play. You sell a customer this amplifier today, or when they are out in a week or two, and you get this into their car, you can build them an awesome system with some components in the front and coaxes in the rear and a single 10. Okay, great, they're happy. But when they come back and they want to step it up a little bit, sell them an ACM 2.300, a little 2-channel amplifier, and let's go active on that front stage. Or let's add some 3s to the A-pillars and let's go 3-way in the front and go active. Or maybe, we want to take the 5th channel. Maybe it is a BMW like we talked about earlier. Use that 5th channel at first to run those under-seat woofers. That's all the bass they've got. It sounds pretty good, actually. Now, when they come back and they want to go big bass and you want to add a couple of 12s in the back, now use that DSP output to add an LC 1500. And now you've got a really serious system at that point. I mean, there's not much you couldn't do with that. So keep in mind with those DSP outputs that they can really be used for anything that you want.
Yeah, Mario S asked, do you recommend at least 2-gauge power wire to these amplifiers? And that's a great question. It really depends on the setup, where the amps are mounted and all that stuff. If you're doing an under-seat mount and a battery in the front, I think 4-gauge would be fine if you're just solely relying on the 5-channel amplifiers.
Right.
I think as you expand and do more, you would certainly want to look at that and look at the power consumption. I know it's a 25-year-old analogy, but a McDonald's milkshake, through a McDonald's straw is different from a coffee stir, right? And that's how I have always looked at power. If you are mounting an LC and you're doing 5 channels of amplification under a seat, I think just 4-gauge would be perfectly fine. As you go further back, if you're doing, you have a front battery and an LC5 and you're only doing those 5 channels, 2-gauge would be fine. But if you're doing a D 1300 and you're adding another amplifier, the battery is under the hood, you have 15 feet or more, I think odd gauge is more in line, because with anything that allows you to have power in the world, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to have a lot of support for it. So
I think the length is the most important there.
Yeah, we engineered a great amplifier that does amazing stuff. The last thing that you want to do as a retailer is sell a $799 or $1,100 amplifier and squash it down with inadequate power. Right?
Yeah, you don't want to choke this amplifier. We don't want to sell a CCA 4-gauge kit with 20 feet of power wire and put this thing at the back of the car. If it's a Chrysler vehicle or one of these newer cars where the battery's in the trunk and you're going to put this amp 4 feet away from it, 4-gauge is fine. 2-gauge, absolutely no problem. if, like Chris said, batteries under the hood and this thing's going in the back of a Tahoe or a Suburban and you got 18 to 20 feet, you're going to want to run 1-aught or 2-gauge, depending on, you know, your length. So there's some great charts out there too that you can look at, and you can go, you know, wattage versus length, and it'll give you a cross section of what size wire to run. So you can Google that chart if you need
I
to.
will say though, just with the amount of power, that these amplifiers are really pressing the threshold of their fusing capabilities. I will say that, because you know, 120 amps of fusing on these, yeah, you know, if you're playing some robust, very clean audio, these amplifiers are going to pull some juice. You know, we're not making you know, substandard class D amplifiers here. We're making amplifiers that are going to be able to have some support, you know. If you want your audio to be above par and you're using an audio control amplifier, then give it what it needs to deliver exceptional results. You know, the worst thing in the world that can happen is that we spend, you know, a year and a half engineering a product, and you guys out there are not supporting that product by giving it what it needs to sustain life and provide the best output possible.
Yeah, don't choke it down. Use some OFC wire, use some good quality real copper wire, and you know, feed it an adequate gauge, and you'll never have an issue. You know, that's the best way to think of it. Like Chris said, I mean, these are fused pretty high. You're looking at 120 amps of fusing. Just keep that in mind. 120 amps. Look at your distance of how far this thing's going to be, and then calculate what gauge you need. I think that's the safest bet there. So again, when looking at the D5, you know, close up of that top panel, you'll notice very few controls, just one, all LED indicators. And this amp does also have a top cover plate, just like the LC we showed earlier. That top cover plate drops on there if you want it, and just kind of conceals things a little bit, just gives it a really nice, clean, simple look, and just kind of an understated, classy looking amplifier, especially once they fire up and that blue glow comes from inside. Now, one of the questions we've been getting a lot lately too on these guys is, are they fan cooled? What's the cooling mechanism? Are these things getting hot? And so both the LC and the D series amplifiers here in the 5-channel lineup are both fan cooled. There is a fan in there. If I actually move out of the way a little bit, you can kind of see right about there on the PC board, there is a fan under that on the board of these amplifiers. So the other cool part with these is, again, down to engineering and how we design things. That fan does not come on the second you power on the amplifier. It comes on when needed. There is thermal control in here that's going to fire up and rail up and down that fan based on its needs and temperature and cooling. So some pretty cool stuff there. One of the other differences that we should touch on between an LC and a D series, a couple of things physically. One of those is the control knob that gets plugged in. With the LC 5.1300, we use an ACR1, which is our standard rotary control knob. It's a potentiometer, so it has a start and stop point, and that's going to be just for sub control on an LC5. On a D5, you're going to use the ACR3. Couple of reasons for that. The ACR3 is a rotary encoder, which means it has no start and stop points. It's an infinity knob, if you want to think of it that way. The ACR3 can do a couple of cool things, though. Not only can it be used as a sub control, it can also be set up within the software to become a master volume control if you want it. So if you want to put this D5 into a vehicle, and maybe the factory head unit volume only goes so high, or there's a lot of distortion afterwards and something like that, or maybe it's a classic car and there is no head unit. Maybe we're just going to Bluetooth into the amplifier or something like that. The ACR3 is a great piece to be able to do master volume. What's even cooler than that is that you can do both. If you want to do sub control and master volume, you can do that. With DSP presets, we could do preset number 1 for master volume, preset number 2 for sub control, if that's what you'd like. and you can make that happen. The ACR3 also allows you to switch between those presets, which is pretty cool. One of the last things I'll mention on here that's a physical difference is the option port. When you're talking anything from AudioControl that's in the D series of amplifiers, anything D series has the option port. What's really cool about the option port is that it allows you to plug in a simple device and add Bluetooth to this amplifier in about 10 seconds. So you can add what's called our AC-BT24. It's a Bluetooth receiver. It's a cool little piece that plugs straight into that option port, no wiring necessary. And it's going to turn this amp into a Bluetooth audio amplifier. Now you can stream aptX HD supported high-res audio straight into your D5 and have a head unit-less solution if that's what you're looking for. So if you did want to do a system, with nothing else there, as far as head unit goes, you could certainly do that.
But look at this, you guys.
Yep.
This is something that we don't talk about enough at AudioControl, and that's the DM Control app, which is amazing because most of you guys are retailers here, but this is a solution that we created for your consumer that give you simple controls over the DSP where you can set it up where they can do really simple interaction and have preset control and just volume control over a master volume or a bass volume. Just something that I don't know that a lot of you are really taking advantage of, but it's a simple thing that is super cool.
Yeah, and it's one of those features where it really allows the end user, the consumer, to feel like they're having something more than just a regular amplifier. Because without that, at the end of the day, yes, the DSP helped you as the retailer, as the installer, get the most out of the system. That DSP helped you make it sound as good as it could possibly sound, and it gave you a lot of options and control. But from the consumer's perspective, you got to think of it from their point of view, and that is they bought a black box that makes their car sound good and made it loud, right? That's what they think. And so between an LC and a D series, if you are comparing the two with your customer, they're not going to see a whole lot of difference there, right? You tell them, oh, well, with this one, I can log into it with a computer and make all these changes. And they're like, okay, cool. But if they're the techie type, if they're the type that's into this at all or has any interest in audio at all, talk to them about that DM Control app. It's a free app for them. It allows them to have basic control over the DSP, like Chris mentioned, DSP presets, master volume or sub volume, and that's it, you guys. It does not allow them into any of the settings that you don't want them to have access to, because nobody wants customers changing crossover points while driving down the road.
It's a real simple thing. Yeah,
it is.
And when you look at even in the home theater world, it's like, okay, well, I can control my home theater through this platform, but what about my blinds, right? Like if we went out and set up home theater stuff, we want the consumer to be able to change their blinds really easily. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like that. Like as a retailer in the car world, I want the consumer to have a little bit of control over the lighting of that room. And that's what the DM Control app is to me. It gives them the ability to get in there and go, oh, I want it to be, multi-seat, not just driver seat. I want them to be able to control the subwoofer volume control. I think it would be super cool if more of you guys could get behind it and understand it and go, oh yeah, come listen to my new setup. Because at the end of the day, a lot of consumers are really proud of the money that they're spending to make their car sound good. And when they demo it and you guys spend hours making it sound really great for a passenger, and they don't understand the difference, and they sit in the passenger side, they're like, yeah, it sounds really great. I hear all the speakers over here on the right side. They sound fantastic. There's no staging, there's no anything like that. But if you set it up for them and they have the ability to go, oh, watch what I can do. I can make it sound really, really good for me, and I can make it sound really, really good for you with a simple touch of a button. You're giving them power, right?
Yeah.
Without going into the user interface and really messing up all your work, you know?
Yeah,
So
there's no way for them to get in through that app and make any important changes or really screw up anything, honestly. Tony had asked in the chat, what are all the apps? So there are 2 apps that go along with any of our D series products, and that is DM Smart DSP, which is going to look something like this. DM Smart DSP is the app that you, as the installer, use to set up, tune, adjust, dial in, whatever you want to call it, these products. Okay, anything from us that's DSP based is going to use this same app. It's called DM Smart DSP. Now, one of the cool things about DM Smart DSP is that it runs on all the different platforms. If you're an Android guy, great. iPhone guy, perfect. If you have an Android tablet or an iPad, doesn't matter. A Mac or PC, doesn't matter. It runs on all of those different platforms and it looks the same regardless of which platform it's ran on. So unlike some competitors where if you tune the product using a cell phone or a tablet, you get less options, you will get all of the options of the tuning software regardless of which platform it's set up on. Now, I don't recommend tuning our products from a cell phone. A tablet is okay, depending on the size of the tablet. I highly recommend using a laptop and using a USB cable. It's fastest, it boots up the quickest, it allows you to do all the firmware and software updates. It also allows you to have a keyboard with the little arrow keys and a mouse or a trackpad. It's just a better experience for you. And I think you can get the tune done faster if you're using our software. Now, the other app that we should mention is the AudioControl app, and that's just going to be DM-CTRL when you're looking it up in the App Store. And again, that's available on Android or iPhone, or App Store, I should say, iOS devices, and it'll work on either, and it looks the same on both. When we're talking about tuning and software and all of these things, the point that we want to drive home with this is that the DM Smart DSP software was really created for you guys. This was created for installers and for guys to be able to get in there, set these things up, get them tuned and dialed in and sounding great, and get them on the road. You know, I have a little saying that when I go out and do trainings in stores, I'll tell guys, you know, I'll ask their technicians or I'll ask their sales guys, how come you're not selling more DSPs? Well, because my techs, you know, they take 3 or 4 hours to set them up and tune them, and it's a waste of time. We don't make any money. So then I'll ask the techs, well, why is it taking so long? What's the deal? Well, we got to fumble through the software and we got to do this and we got to do that. And sometimes it doesn't work and blah, 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 blah. It's really confusing. So what we've done is we've come up with a software that is easy to use, not just because I work for AudioControl, but because it is genuinely easy to use. It's got a pretty GUI that most people can understand relatively quickly. It's organized into 3 tabs: input, output, and dashboard, which is an overview. And it's really pretty simple. And the saying that I have when I go out and do those trainings in the stores is, look, once this product is physically installed, and that goes for any D series product, once it's installed and everything's physically wired up, from the moment you plug in the USB and you get connected to the product, you should be able to dial in crossovers, set up the EQ, set up all your levels, do your summing, do time correction if you're going to do time correction. You should be able to do all of that in probably 30 to 60 minutes. If it can't be done in that amount of time, something's wrong. Something's either physically wrong with the install, wires aren't correctly, positioned or connected correctly. Something is wrong at that point. Because remember, we're not winning I Ask a World finals here. We are trying to make these cars sound fantastic and do what I call production work, right? We're trying to make these cars sound awesome, exceed customer expectations, and get that car out of the shop on the road and into your customers' hands so they can go enjoy it and you can move on to the next one.
Play loudly.
That's really what this has done.
And play
there you go.
loudly.
And play loudly. Sound great and get loud.
It's been a year since we've been doing stuff, but one of my favorite things about car audio is when I am heading to the airport and I have an hour-and-a-half commute and it's early in the morning and I just want to rail on my system. You know what I mean? I want to get to the airport, I'm going to drink my coffee, and I want to just, like, a song comes on that I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. This is my time, to have my whoosah, like, ooh, like let's crank on it and feel good. And I
Love it.
think all of our products are the pinnacle of all of that. Um, I would love to have hundreds of thousands of people out there that could have that same experience,
Yeah.
whenever they get in their car, whether they're commuting every day or whether they're 2 hours away from the next job site, to be able to have a moment where they can get away from life, uh,
Hmm.
and just like their jam comes on, and then they just can have that moment where they want to just go and turn it up and just soak in the awesomeness of music, and enjoy the clarity, the volume. Um, I mean, that's why we do this, you guys. That is
Yep.
really the pinnacle of what we're trying to achieve is solitary moments of musical bliss, you know?
Yep.
And audio control products are made for that, It's like, as much as we want to give you guys the easiest this or the easiest that, at the end of the day, it's a compromise to make sure that you guys have the talent, the ability to deliver something that is going to do exactly what I just said for your consumer.
Yep.
Give them
Because
the
that's really what it's
moments.
all about.
Yeah, give them the
Yeah.
moments of exceptional audio quality. A lot
Hmm.
of car audio people who are spending thousands of dollars don't have the means to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on their home audio equipment, you know? And this is our time to really shine and give them the experience of a concert in your car.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing with that, before we wrap things up here, is think about it. In today's world where most people live and how most people's lifestyles are, where else are people allowed or able to do that? Most people can't do that in their home. They either have the wife or the kids or the husband or the neighbors because they're in an apartment
Mhm.
or a condo. They can't turn it up loud and have that moment of musical bliss, that sonic ecstasy. They can't have that. Headphones are great. They're practical. They're, affordable and all that stuff. But they don't really provide that same experience, that physical experience. The only place most of us can do that is either at a concert, which right now isn't an option, or in your car. And physically and monetarily speaking, the car is the most common and sensical place to do it. It's not that expensive to do it in a car compared to, like Chris said, most people's homes or home theaters. So just remember, as much as we can talk about specs and power and features, it's all about selling that emotion, selling fun, selling audio excellence and sonic bliss and auditory nirvana. Basically, that's what it's all about. So one thing I do want to mention too before we wrap this up for the day, guys, is we did do a whole lot of training this last summer. We did 27 weeks of weekly web training, Chris Bennett and I. And if you want to dive deeper into something like the DM Smart DSP software, we did a week on just DM Smart DSP. We did a week on the software side of audio control, which covers DM Smart DSP, DM Control, and DM RTA. So if you want to dive deeper into that stuff, if we didn't cover something today, definitely go check that stuff out. It's at Audio Control's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/audio control car. And there is a library or playlist of all of those trainings. We've now started doing monthly web trainings together. So we are doing once a month where we pick a topic and focus on that for about an hour. So that's something you can look forward to as well.